All right, we are back with the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines. First impressions of Florida State's 31-29 win over Boston College. My name is Pat Burnham. I'm a football analyst for the Osceola, and I am joined, as always, after the game by former FSU offensive lineman and college football coach Mark Salva. Mark, there's a lot of ways to look at this game. I don't think anybody that covers Florida State thought that we were going to see a 2-point ball game. We talked about it before the game. We thought if Florida State played up to its capabilities, it would cruise to a win as it gets ready to head to Clemson. There's a lot to unpack here. I want to get your first thoughts. Obviously, a lot closer game in the first half than it looked like Florida State was going to run away with in the third quarter. Took a 21-point lead, only to be mistakes. The kicking game with the onside kick, the fumble that led to a touchdown. We got a lot to talk about, but just what are your first impressions of what you saw today from Florida State?
Yeah, so my first impressions are this. First of all, we did this show after the LSU game, and I think Fish said we're going to win the national championship.
Yep.
Right? And the tendency is to want to look at this game and say we're not going to win another game. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Right.
Yeah. It just goes to show that we're not good enough to give a C effort and win a ball game against a Power 5 opponent. And say what you want about how Boston College was leading up to this game. The thing about Boston College is they got their ship right.
Yep.
And let's face it, they had, I think, almost 20 penalties.
So we had 20 penalties for 132 yards, and still almost won this football game.
Still almost won the football game. So, where's the fault? The fault lies in a lot of different places. I'll tell you the thing I was most disappointed in. I took it for granted we were going to dominate the line of scrimmage, and that didn't necessarily materialize. I didn't think we ran the ball very well. I was disappointed in the offensive line. They did a good job of mixing up their fronts and coverages and blitzes. It was hard to kind of predict. I think it was kind of hard to predict what they were going to do. Jordan wasn't particularly sharp again. So what is this a one-off? Is it a two-off? Is it, is the great games he has, is that the exception and not the rule? That's the other thought I have in my head.
Yeah. And go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there, as Mike said, there's a lot of things, and you and I have both been around this game a long time and involved in it with teams. You at South Carolina, me at South Florida. The important thing is that you did win the ball game, and you get to move on the next week. And Mike says this team will grow. And listen, if you want an example of that, look at what happened to Boston College last week, and they come in here and push Florida State to the brink. It was came down to the last drive, but I think certainly if you want to glass half full or glass half empty, certainly the penalties that you could say Boston College lost this game more so than Florida State won it. Florida State did just enough to win, but yeah, I think if you want to look at it, the fact that Boston College was able to fight. I mean, they. All the penalties they tried to hand Florida State this football game, and Florida State was able to finish. But I think, we would have liked to have seen them finish earlier. Listen, we talked about it in my scouting report, my keys to victory, that we all combined our thoughts for. Thomas Castellanos, the BC quarterback, looked very good against Holy Cross, 17-22. But listen, he grew by leaps and bounds of this game, 20 for 33 for 305, 16 rushes for 95 yards. The key to Florida State's defensive game plan was should have been to corral Castellanos. They had a hard time doing that. What did you see? And then again, what we saw against LSU, the defensive Achilles heel is pass coverage, and we saw blown coverages again that played into that. We saw a lack of effectiveness on third down defense, particularly as the game continued to go. So what are you seeing in the secondary, and what can Florida State do to rectify that? Is their schedule is going to get harder from here?
Yeah, it was hard for me to see on the TV copy. And when I go back and rewatch it, I'll confirm some of the things I'm about to say. But the underneath coverage to me is lacking, and I think that's your second level, whoever inverts out of the secondary if they're pattern reading or whatnot, whatever it is, the underneath coverage, guys get lost, and there's too many guys running wide open, in the intermediate levels, and so that's got to get corrected. And the pass rush, until we started bringing heat, there really wasn't much of a pass rush. I mean, and that kid, Castellanos, the guy, obviously he's a twitchy athlete, and those kind of guys have always given us trouble since, in the last several years. Let's just say for Adam Fuller's defense, that for whatever reason, we have a problem with those kind of guys. I mean, you think of Malik Cunningham, even Jaden Daniels had a lot of yards rushing. This guy has almost 100 yards rushing, and it turns out he can throw the ball halfway decent. But I mean, the guys who are wide open. I mean, I don't think I can't think off the top of my head how many pass completions were to receivers that were being challenged by defensive back. I think most of the times that there was a guy close, the ball was incomplete or was just not a good throw, right? So he hit guys that were wide open, and that's so it looks to me like it has something to do with the underneath coverage, and I'll have to study it a little more to confirm that.
All right. Let's move a little bit over to the offensive side of the ball. Boston College came into this game giving up 217 yards on the ground to Northern Illinois and to Holy Cross. Florida State, as you said, did not run the ball effectively as we thought they would. 34 carries for 128 yards, less than a 4 yards per carry average. Benson, 14 of 68. He did not look as elusive as he normally does. And he didn't, to me, I don't know what you saw from the television, but it didn't look like he was running as, I'm not going to say hard, as strong as he usually does.
He looks like a different guy this year, for sure. It's almost like he's trying to be too patient. I think what made him great last year is he'd take the ball on the line of scrimmage, break a tackle, and, then he's downfield. He seems to be kind of tippy-toeing behind the line of scrimmage a little too much for my taste. And honestly, I just don't, our offensive line, we're just not moving guys off the ball very much, and guys are getting off blocks too easy. So there was a lot of that today, it seemed to me. And I tried to watch it pretty close, and they're all offenders. I mean, there's no one guy that's just, not playing well. I think it's just as a collective, it just wasn't their best game, to say the least. And, I thought we would, their stemming might have had a little something to do with it. I know, we like to run checks in the running game and run to certain looks, and then they stem, and then maybe it's not as great a look as it at first was. I don't know if that has something to do with it or not, but I'll look at that too. But it just overall, look, bottom line is this. There are a few key plays in that game that really flipped it on its head really quick. I mean, we third quarter.
Oh, the fumble for sure, yeah. Well,
the fumble and then the squib kick. Those two quick. That was at least field position. I know we stopped on fourth down, I think, after that, but it did get field position, and then we had the throw and the fumble. So it's some key errors there. We had some key penalties, and we were getting ready to go for it on fourth down and get a penalty, right? And now we're end up punting it, and then but look, they had 95 yards to go, and they did it in like 2 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes and 11 seconds.
Big runs on third and super long, a big throw on third and super long. Those are just those are assignment errors. Those aren't effort errors. Those are assignment errors. So it's mental. It's guys not paying attention to detail. It's missed assignments. It's those kinds of things. And that's the thing that the good news is those kinds of things can be corrected, but I don't think Cade Klubnik is a running quarterback per se, but I think he runs good enough, and so that's concerning. Look, again, I'm not going to knee-jerk react here and say we're not going to win another game. At the same time, we're not unbeatable, and that at least that was proven today. And you know what? Every team kind of goes through these. You got ebbs and flows through the course of a season. This is some kind of wake-up call. I hope we came out relatively unscathed. Jordan finished the game, but after sleeping on that shoulder, it looked to me like he landed on that on his left arm.
That's what I thought it was.
Yeah. So that thing can obviously it wasn't too bad. He was able to finish the game. I saw Bethune got hurt there late. I don't know if he came back or not. So, it's hopefully it serves as a wake up call. Understand we got to play a full 60 minutes, not 55 minutes of football.
Yeah, and we saw nothing in practice that they see. I went to practice on Tuesday and Wednesday. They seem to have really good practices. I mean, they're getting a lot of reps. So, a lot of guys were practicing really hard. One of the things that was mentioned up in the press box, that I'm not sure if it's focus or intensity, but did you see any lack of focus and intensity from this team compared to what you saw against LSU and Southern Miss?
It's hard for me to explain what I'm about to say. So, 12:30 game on the road with all the other stuff that was going on.
Yep.
Throw that on top of it's their red bandana game, and it's very special to them, and they play really well in that game. And when they designate this game, it builds for them. They get there's a little bit of a mental edge they get in this game. And again, you got to give Boston College some credit. They came out with what looked like a pretty good plan, and that kid grew up before our eyes. And I'll be curious to see how they do the remainder of the season, but you got to give them credit too. So it's sometimes you just can't get out of your own way in situations like that. It's hard to overcome. It really is. I mean, it's not intentional. It's just sometimes you're just so good that you win these kind of games, and that's kind of if we. Look, there are plenty of times when we were really, when some of our best teams would come out and lay an egg in a situation like this, an early game on the road, jacked up crowd, just not playing to your best for whatever reason. I can't say it's a lack of intensity. You think you prepare in the same, but let's just face it, knowing Boston College's results the last 2 weeks, knowing how they've looked the last 2 weeks, it's just human nature. You just can't really help yourself thinking, okay, well, we beat LSU and we scored 66 on Southern Miss. We're going to boat race these guys. You might not say it, but in the back of your mind, it's always there. And then lo and behold, you're in a fight for your life. Thank goodness for Jaheim Bell.
Yeah, Jaheim had a huge game. 5
Johnny
catches
Wilson
and for 76 yards and a touchdown. Then you had Johnny Wilson 4 for 105. Obviously, there was no sign of Johnny Wilson we saw last week. He called every ball that was thrown his way. Then you had Toafili and Rodney Hill tied for the third leading receiver. Both had 2 catches. Now, they played a lot of single high safety looks, Mark. Keon Coleman was targeted but finished with no passes. Were you surprised that they could not scheme him open, given the fact that he was the number 1 receiver most of the time? And for you guys that are not familiar with what the number 1 receiver, outside receiver, to whatever side he's on, I was a little bit surprised that they could not figure out a way to scheme him open, given the fact that the safety, they mostly single high. So they did play a little double, but were you surprised about that? And
They definitely were rotating guys down and trying to load the box and play the run with numbers. And I thought for sure that would play in our hands, with Keon on the outside. Now he did throw that one to the end zone. It was a little flat throw. Those ones he caught at LSU, those balls were a little more arcing, and he was able to make a play on the ball. The last couple of times he's thrown that fade, that even though he's covered, they've been flat throws and really difficult catches. But and some of those throws that Johnny caught, they were kind of mirrored routes on the other side, so he could have thrown it to either side. He chose to throw to Johnny, I think, on some of those. So am I surprised they didn't try to get to Keon a little more? Yeah, a little bit. I know they try to run a reverse and maybe even a quick, hitch or screen to him. McCullers, it really didn't come off. A little disappointed in that for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned, obviously this was Thomas Castellaно's second start. FSU was, you would thought against that offensive line would have been able to get more pressure. Obviously they did get pressure on sometimes, that he was just such a dynamic athlete with his feet that he was able to make some moves, get out of there. But 1 sack against a team that was playing with its second left tackle this game. Were you surprised about that? And you mentioned as they started bringing pressure, they got back. But were you surprised that FSU could not get after Castellanos more and get him on the ground with just its regular 4-man package?
Yeah, I was. Again, going into the game, I thought both our lines would control the game, and that couldn't be further from the truth. They converted on some short yardage runs, third and short, fourth and short. That was a little disappointing. Most of them were quick snaps, and I don't know if we didn't get lined up or we just, we're caught on our heels. But I was disappointed on that part of it. And I don't know why that was. We were not getting off blocks. Are we not sticking on blocks on offense? Is the effort not there? That's something I'm going to dig into for sure.
Yeah, listen. Sometimes you'd rather be lucky than good. Obviously, Boston College did not play its best football in this game either. As we said, the penalty yardage, when they go back, they're going to kick themselves the next 2 days until they go back to practice to get ready for their next game. What is, we talked to Rodney Hill and after the game, and he said, listen, it certainly wasn't a party atmosphere in the locker room, that he did not think that they took this team lightly. And he said it's about us, which is what you do say. But Mike mentioned that this could be a learning experience for this team. What is Mike going to try to teach this team coming out of this game where it didn't play up to its capabilities, or we just saw a Boston College team that's starting to play to it? But what can Mike take back and teach this team, and how can this team grow coming off this loss? You and I have both been in these games where you don't play your best football and you come out with a win. And can this serve as a, teachable moment? Sure, there's going to be some, but can it serve as a wake-up call as they get ready to go to Clemson?
Yeah, I think what this team needs to learn to do is to perform at a high level. Your standard performance must stay consistent regardless of the circumstances around you, and regardless of the emotional the emotional highs or lows that you find yourself in, right? If you have to depend on being jacked up for a game to perform well, then that's not necessarily a sign of a great team. The really, really good teams have consistent performance regardless of the circumstances around them, regardless of their mentality and the pageantry and all the other stuff surrounding the game. And I think if we have to go against an LSU or a Clemson or Miami or Florida for us to play well, that's not a good thing. We need to be able to play at a high level regardless of who we're playing. And as cliche as it sounds, this is about us, Florida State. It's not about the team. And so that's what that means, right? That's what that means. And I think maybe they say it, but now they have, that's what that means. I still have to play at a very high level, regardless of who the opponent is or what the circumstances around the game are.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, I think it could serve as a wake-up call because you can't play this way against Clemson and Miami for certain, what we've seen from them, and expect to walk out of Death Valley and then obviously play that way against Miami as we start to move forward. And there's going to be some games. You still got Pitt left on this schedule. They usually play really good defense. So listen, obviously you and I probably don't have the overreactions that some people do because of our history in football and around the sport. But we obviously had some very strong takes on this football team after the LSU game. Unfortunately, Fish could not be here with us today. He had a particularly strong take after the LSU game.
Only knee jerk.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and we don't want to get, and here's what we do know, Mark. We will go back and watch this game Sunday and Monday, and we will feel differently one way than or the other. We may feel better about it. We may feel worse about it, but we won't feel the same as we do right now.
Right.
And the coaching staff and the players are going to go through the same thing, right? I'm sure they're going to find some things that they did better, and I'm sure they're going to find some things where they're going to be wiping their brow, saying, "Damn, we got lucky. We got out there."
It feels like a loss, right?
Yeah.
It feels like a loss, but again, go back to that third quarter when we took total control of the game, and that's the level that we need to play at all times. You can't have this waxing and waning that seems to happen. And look, it happened really fast. It's funny because that's how fast it can happen, right? A messed up squid kick, turnover for 6, a bad 3 and out. That's how fast these things can happen if you just don't take care of business. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we certainly came out of LSU game thinking, wow, this is a ACC championship caliber football team that's got
And it
a
still
chance.
is.
Yeah. So that was my question. Do you feel like they can get this corrected? Obviously we know Mike's not a guy that lets a second pass where he's not intense. So he's going to get at, we know he's going to use this game as teachable moment. But do you still think that, do you have more questions coming out of this game about this team, or do you feel like, hey, they played their worst football game and they'll be able to get refocused and go up to Clemson and give it 4 quarters, and even throughout the season, is this still a team that can get an play in the ACC championship game and maybe even win it? And do you still feel like after this game it's a college football playoff team?
There's some things that need to get corrected. Right, we got to correct the coverage bus first and foremost.
We've seen it against good teams, right? Or we saw it against everybody except Southern Miss. Yep.
Every week it happened in Southern Miss too. There was 2 big coverage busts on those wheel routes. One of them was thrown short. If you don't remember, one of them the guy caught it, and that's the one Akeem Dent got hurt on, right?
Yeah, and they should have scored a touchdown on the tight end wheel route that they underthrew.
He underthrew it, right? So that is still a thing, and if that doesn't get corrected, it's going to cost us moving forward. So that's got to get corrected.
How do they correct it? I mean, it's repetitive. It does not seem to be. If you wanted to be very critical, that does not seem to be getting better. They're not seeing. I mean, you saw several big plays where there was nobody around the receiver. I don't know whether that was because they were worried about the quarterback taking off and running. That's more of an eye discipline thing. Is it a scheme thing? I mean, obviously you're going to have to go back and watch the game, but what are your thoughts on what you've seen now at the LSU game?
I think there's too much indecision, and guys, like for instance, like I remember watching on the first long pass play that Boston College ran. I think it was on the first drive. The linebackers were, do I stay, and because the quarterback started jigging around, and then he pulled up and threw it, and there was 20 yards between the deep coverage and the linebackers, and hit the crosser, and I'm thinking, okay, do one or the other. You can't sit in. You can't, do I stay here for the quarterback? Do I get back in my zone? Do I look for a crosser, or there's just too much indecision. I think they need to just either simplify it or, play. How do you do it? Well, you play more man, or you take away the if ands. Just, make a decision. The other thing too, again, Fuller is going to want to play the run with a light box,
right?
And we continue to do that, and that kind of plays into that bend don't break kind of thing that we always seem to whatever, but. What's happening is the linebackers are getting too involved in play actions and the eye candies and all that kind of stuff, and there just needs to be less indecision in terms of what's happening in the coverage, and I think that's where it is.
Well, let me one last question on the defense. We saw a lot more 4-3 run today than we've had against Southern Miss or LSU. Do you think that maybe the lack of running that, they haven't run it quite as much as they did in this game? Do you think that might have had something to do with some of the coverage breakdowns? They just have not repped it enough in game situations?
I mean, it could be. I mean, again, I'll have to look at it, but if you go into a game with the defense, you're accountable for it as a player and as a coach. There's no. That's not an excuse. I'm not going to. I would just. If you put it in the game plan, you better execute it, because and here's the thing, you can't run everything, so you got to pick and choose what you're going to do, and if that's what you're rolling, that's what you're rolling with. I remember, whenever we say we wanted to put in a play coach bag, we look at the board and say, okay, which one are you going to take out, right? You can't keep putting stuff in without taking stuff out, and so we part of it too. What do we do well? What do this group? What do they do well? And right now in coverage, I don't know what that is. We try to play quarters, right? We try to play, 2 shell, but if we don't start getting these crossers and these ends and those kinds of things, then we got to do something else.
Yeah. Yeah, well, here's what we do know: the Seminoles are 3-0. They're still perfect on the season. They've got a huge game at Clemson coming up at 12 noon on Saturday in Death Valley. Let me ask you this, Mark. They came into this game ranked number 3 in the nation. When we see the polls on Sunday night, Monday, where do you think Florida State will be? If you had to guess, and it
So I
doesn't
had to
really
get,
matter. It doesn't really matter. But I mean,
yeah, no,
just
I mean,
guess.
I'd have to guess we'd probably drop a spot or two.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, it depends on what happens around college football. There's been some
Right.
really crazy scores I've seen. I have not watched a single play other than this one. But listen, Florida State is 3-0. We do know that. We do
Yep.
know once we go back for our rewatch, which we will have on the Osceola.com or FloridaState.rivals.com, myself, Mark, Kurt, Bob, Jerry will all be starting a thread on the Osceola.com or FloridaState.rivals.com where we rewatch the game. We share with you our impressions as we start to rewatch it and have a better understanding of what we saw live. Please go to the Osceola.com. We will usually start that about midday. Marco and Jerry will probably be on it first as Kurt and I will be flying back to Tallahassee. But as Mike said, the most important thing is they did come out of here winning the ball game.
Imagine how we'd feel if we lost this game.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. We would probably be in the tank. But listen, I don't think, and this is no excuse because I thought it was a disappointing performance. But you and I both know football games are not easy to win. And as you said, we talked about it in the pregame show. The weather was not a factor. That had nothing to do with what happened today. That was from what was forecast to get anything close to that. But certainly it was an emotional day. It is a big day for Boston College. And obviously they had intensity throughout the game and overcame adversity and made this a close game. But certainly this is something that Florida State needs to learn from, should learn from. And really, you got 6 days now to get ready for Clemson, which is going to be a tough game. Listen, I'm sure Clemson feels differently, and not that they've kept their eye on Florida State throughout the season, but I'm sure they might feel a little bit differently about this game than they thought coming in because Florida State, first 2 weeks of the season, looked like they were really on to something, and they still may be, but certainly some things they need to work out as they move forward. But Mark, Jerry, Kurt, and I will share some of the things we see in our second watch Sunday tomorrow, so please join us for that. Obviously, we will have coverage of Mike Norvell's press conference on Monday as he recaps what happened in this game after he gets a chance to watch the film.
Go Noles.
All right, sorry about that, folks. We had a small technical difficulty, so we're sorry to get to wrap up the show properly. But we want to thank you for joining us today, and we will be back with Second Look Sunday tomorrow, as I said, at theosceola.com or FloridaState.rivals.com. As Florida State hangs on against Boston College for a 31-29 win, and like I said, we'll be back on Monday having coverage of Mike Norvell's press conference, looking back at this game and looking forward to Clemson as third-ranked Florida State stays undefeated. And we want to thank you for joining us, and hope we'll see you next week for our pregame show heading into Clemson on Seminole Sidelines, and obviously for our postgame coverage of the Clemson game next week, which is noon on, I believe, ABC with a noon kick in Death Valley. But Florida State is 3-0, stays perfect on the season, and we'll take away some things that can grow from this game, as Mike Norvell said. But a win is a win is a win, and we'll see if they can go to 4-0 next week. Thanks for joining us.